Hi, this is Professor Innes, and we are on the module number 4 on Epicurus's hedonism. So this follows on nicely from Aristotle when he talks about happiness, and here we've got Epicurus who's going to talk about pleasure, and we've got to make that distinction. Also keep in mind this does lead to Bentham, who talks about pleasure, and again this is linked towards moral conduct in regards to what makes human beings happy, namely what are the possibilities, because if we're talking about a moral action, we don't want to hope for happiness when all we can possibly hope for is pleasure. So like when you get to Bentham, he's going to argue that people are really not that sophisticated, and the only thing they can hope to attain is as much pleasure as possible as opposed to much pain. We are not those who are duty-bound, and we're certainly not those who are virtuous. Aristotle talks about virtue, and as you're going to read after Bentham, he talks about duty. So here with Epicurus, he talks about pleasure, which Bentham is going to talk about as well. So pleasure, as we're going to understand, is something, is a question you'll ask, is this a sophisticated understanding of human beings? Or is it just a realistic appreciation that we're not up to that much as human beings? Our moral capabilities, therefore our moral expectations of ourselves are really quite limited. That's something for you to think about. But nonetheless, that's the hallmark of Epicurus's thoughts here. So we'll go straight into his argument. And it's an interesting argument, whether or not you believe it or not. But his argument can be taken and used in modern day life. So, for example, he talks about the tranquility of the soul. Aristotle definitely pointed towards the tranquility of the soul. And here, the case is, if you are going to do something which does not provide you with pleasure, then it's going to upset that equilibrium, and you're going to be very unhappy. So in that sense, that pleasure, as we've said, it might be sophisticated in the sense pleasure is gained from helping others. Pleasure is gained from doing things which makes you happy about yourself. So doing something which makes you happy about yourself could be acts of apparent good, but nonetheless they are acts which are pleasurable, such as if we were to say that I don't know, helping somebody with their homework, for example. Yeah, sounds like a good act, but really did it just to make yourself feel good about yourself. Namely, it gave you a sense of well-being and purpose. But that's somewhat hedonistic. It's pleasurable. It's egocentric, well, egoistic, not egocentric, but egoistic in the sense it's thinking about one's own purpose and well-being. So in that way, therefore, we've got to constantly think about these things that make us, which gain us pleasure. I was going to say happiness, but we're not talking about happiness here, we're talking about pleasure. So gain us that pleasure, and therefore create that rounded tranquility, that full tranquility of the soul, that happiness. Well, tranquility of the soul here. So another thing to do would be to avoid enemies, as mentioned by Epicurus. Now here we are not going to move forward to the Aristotelian notion that we can find our other half, as it were. So therefore, with Aristotle, we are going to be happy when we find that other person who complements us with their qualities and we complement us with their qualities. So if that person happens to be good at map reading and you're no good at map reading, then that's a quality which will complement you. And you're good at astrology where they're not very good at astrology, so that complements them. So it looks like a fully rounded, nice complementary relationship. So in that sense, we're not talking about that type of relationship. All we're considering here is that we have plenty of enemies out there, and those enemies can cause us a lot of pain, therefore take away our pleasure. So what do we do with these enemies? We can't really go around killing them all, because there'll be lots of people to kill. So We'll make them our friends. They're going to be our instrumental friends. They're going to be purely means to an end. I'll be your friend so you're not my enemy. That's where it stops. I don't know if we go around telling people this, or maybe we're fully aware of it. The only reason I talk to this person is because if I don't, then he might be my enemy and make my life a misery. So I better talk to him. So in that sense, we are making our friends our enemies. And this could be anybody. I mean, even when you're married for 10 years, it's best to keep that spouse your friend rather than your enemy. So prudence will dictate to you that if you're a man with a female, then keep buying those flowers every Friday afternoon when you get home from work. You're not doing it because you particularly fond of them at that moment. It's just you understand if you stop buying the flowers, then your life will be less pleasurable as a result. So prudential acts lead towards pleasure. And likewise with the good life, you forget about worrying about the afterlife and God getting you, because as far as Epicurus is concerned, once you die, that's it. Your atoms are displaced into the universe and rejoin the universe. Your psychology, your psychological, spiritual person becomes something else. Therefore, what you were on Earth is not what you are when you are dead. So in that sense, if you're a different thing or different makeup after your death, then the gods can't get you. There's nothing to get. So stop worrying about the gods getting you. As far as the Greeks are concerned, they get you for wrongdoings. So Epicurus says that they can't possibly get you. So that will decrease your anxiety, increase your pleasure, if you can reasonably consider that these gods are not going to be the horrible people to you when you die. So in that sense, Epicurus comes up with this notion of pleasure. It's a calculating, constantly calculating consideration of how pleasure is gained and anxiety, stress, strain, pain is decreased. And again, prudence dictates this, and prudence being that of virtue directed by reason, says, we're not perfect, life is not perfect, and we've got to make good of what we have around us. And in that sense, we gain as much pleasure as we can as a result of it. Right, so that's Epicurus here. And like I said, this is going to be very beneficial for you leading into Bentham. So keep this in mind for Bentham. Bentham talks about pleasure. Once you understand Epicurus' notion of pleasure, then Bentham will be a fine, easy theory to understand. Okay, so what do we have left here? So it looks like everybody's doing perfectly fine with their work. What we got here is you've got 2 lots of homework. So we need to clarify this here. When you do your homework reading, and the section on reading and what's guess we call it homework here, you actually have 2 sections to read per chapter. So read both sections and please do both the pieces of homework at the end. Some of you have not been doing this, so could you please do that? I'll have to grade accordingly if they are not present. Okay, so please do that. Also, full essays, please make sure you do a 5-paragraph by 5 sentence. By 5 sentence, I mean, not short sentences, but lengthy sentences. And again, it doesn't have to be 5 sentences. You can do 7, 8 if you so wish. It just means you've got a fully developed essay: introduction, main body, conclusion. So please make sure you do that when you're doing your exam, and also you're doing the critical response. Those doing the critical response so far have been perfectly fine and provided very nice essays. It's just with the exam, they've been somewhat short. The essay is 1 paragraph. Really, you need a 5-paragraph developed discussion there. Right, and blogs, journal, perfectly fine as well here. Thanks. It looks like the course is going along very nicely. Right, so instead of me telling you what to write in the journal, I'm going to put it in this video for today. So here you've got 3 requirements for the journal response. And this is what you're coming to when I've written in your journal. Please go to the helpful hints video and find out the 3 points you need to cover as a response to your journal entry. Okay, so we're doing it a bit differently than last time. So number 1 is give me an example of an hedonistic act. For example, doing fun classes at university. So here it is, number 1, give me an example of a hedonistic act. An example would be doing fun classes. Don't use the fun classes example, please go and find another one, please. Right, so that's a moral hedonistic act, number 1. Right, number 2, explain the difference between pleasure and happiness and give an example. Again, this is important here. Aristotle talked about happiness, Epicurus talks about pleasure. So give an example of that. So explain the difference between pleasure and happiness. Please give an example. Right, number 3. Explain if there can be such a thing as having too much pleasure. So again, explain if there is such thing as having too much pleasure. May seem like a silly thing to say, but this could be a very reasonable thing to ask. The Baskin-Robbins family had massive freezers in their kitchen, and in those freezers had lots and lots of ice cream, and some of the children, even adults, had ice cream for breakfast as well as other times. As a result of that, lots of them had heart attacks. Lots of pleasure leading to lots of pain. So I think we should possibly curtail our pleasure. Right, so explain if there is a possibility of there being too much thing as too much pleasure. And again, don't use that example, please find your own example of there being too much pleasure. If you want to say that there's no such thing as too much pleasure, then that's fine. Argue that bit, please. Okay, so I think that will do nicely for this particular helpful hints video. So let me know if you need anything, and I'll be talking with you on the journal entry. Okay, have a nice module, and speak to you soon. Bye-bye.